So thank you, friends, for patience. So meditation is something that is on everyone's lips this day. It's a word that you hear a lot. And if you actually ask 20 people about what they think of meditation, you probably get 20 different responses. And it's a little bit like the dandelion here. You know, if one person may look upon the dandelion here and say, oh gosh, I don't want that in my garden because it will give rise to so many more dandelions, so I better take it away immediately. Another person may come to it and see, oh, how wonderful nature is, you know, all these seeds, they will flow away with the wind and they will give rise to new plants. And then yet another third person may say, oh, what a beautiful, perfect sphere. Just look at the differentiation at the periphery and look how they all join in the center. And it is a little bit like that with meditation. However our mind is conditioned, that's the way we will view meditation. So this talk is an attempt to guide us through the very simple ways of how we can use it, hopefully in everyday life. So if we look at the ABCs of meditation, a word comes from the Latin verb meditare, and it simply means to think, to contemplate, and to ponder. And it's a Western term because in the East, in the Eastern tradition, they refer to it as dhyana, which we recognize from the voice of the silence or Patanjali's yoga philosophy. And that has its origin in the Sanskrit root dhya, to contemplate. But with that having said, let's see what the voice of the silence says.
Shun ignorance, and likewise shun illusion. Avert thy face from world deceptions. Mistrust thy senses, they are false. But within thy body, the shrine of thy sensations, seek in the impersonal for the eternal man. And having sought him out, look inward. Thou art Buddha.
Thank you. And if we turn to the voice of the silence, it's a beautiful, practical book written in a very practical way, but it's actually a manual for meditation. And if you turn to this very quote that Jerry read, have you thought about that this quote actually synthesizes the whole process of meditation? So take a look. First, this is where we have to start. We have to get away from our ignorance. We have to get knowledge of what is real and what is not real. We have to shun illusion. We have to move away from the idea of separateness. We have to avert our faces from the word delusions and deceptions. And if we look around in society where everything is a focus on being famous for a minute or two, we have to move away from that personality cult. We also have to mistrust our senses because they are false. They immediately bring in impressions and they move the mind in a way that it becomes modified. But then within thy body, that is to say right here, right now, not somewhere outside us, but here inside within each one of us, we have to seek in the impersonal for the eternal. And the impersonal has to do with being able to let go of the idea of the personality and move our point of identification inwardly, which is the process of meditation. And in this sense, you can see that if we go further inward, we will eventually reach that Buddha nature, which we all are. But of course, how do we do it practically? Now, if we look at another part of the title, it's called self-healing. And self-healing, it is the healing of the lower self by the higher self. And it is a gradual awakening from the illusions of separateness. And this is the process of meditation. We know we have meditation that is, maybe a certain hour of the day or a certain moment that we set aside, but we also have the lifetime meditation. And this is the gradual awakening from the illusion of separateness. The other day, I got a question from a dear friend of mine who has known me for 50-some years, who has attended some of our meetings, our study classes. And he said, what about the Theosophists, Ava? Are they really bookworms? Because wherever you see them, they're just hanging with their nose over the books. And, you know, isn't there something practical that you do? Don't you sit down and meditate together and so forth? And we must say that knowledge is simply wonderful. We need a knowledge of how everything works in the universe. But it also, as everything that has a front, always also have a backside. We have to put it into practice if it's going to stay wonderful. And it can even become an obstacle to us if it is being kept as a possession. Because, you know, the personal ego has a million subtle ways of asserting itself, right? And, you know, it's very alluring to be the one who can debate on Mula Prakriti, the absolute, the different cycles, the 7 hierarchies, and so forth. But if it remains a possession, a dear possession that we cannot get go of, if we do not put the ideas into practice, they become an obstacle in the path or process of meditation. So when we look at meditation and self-healing, we could actually say that what needs to be rehabilitated is our mind. And if we look at the collective mind of humanity today, we can see that it looks pretty diseased. And the way to change this is by rehabilitating each one of us our own mind. And for this, we need to be preparing the ground. And every rehabilitation needs a goal, and it needs a motive. It is like Simon Margus says in Theosophy, that the image is of crucial importance. We need to have an image to move towards. Without a clear image where we're going, we will not be able to realize our goal. And so if we look at the goal from a theosophical perspective, this is it.
Never will I seek nor receive private, individual salvation. Never will I enter into final peace alone. But forever and everywhere will I live and strive for the redemption of every sentient being throughout the world from the bonds of conditioned existence.
So, just as a great musician needs to strike a keynote for composing a masterpiece, so this will be our keynote for our process of meditation. But we don't only need a goal and a motive. We also need to find out how this existence works so we can navigate through the process of meditation. And for this, we are advised to turn to the 3 fundamentals in the secret doctrine, which we can use as a golden formula in our everyday life. Usually, we look at the 3 fundamentals as abstraction, something which concerns the cosmos. But these 3 basic points can be used to the minutest small event in our own life. And it's 3 main keys. We have identity. Who am I? What is God? What is divine? And is there any difference? We have structure. How do the nature's law work? And we have purpose. Why and what is the purpose of the whole evolutionary process? The first question, that of identity, who am I? Well, that's the $1 million question. There are sages in the East that have used that as their only mantra to find out who am I. And we can also see that normally when we look ourselves in the mirror, we do not really see our own true identity. We see concepts, we see forms, we see crystallized thought patterns, but very seldom we see ourselves as we truly are. So what is this with a point of identification? What do I identify with? And here comes the crux of the matter. So if we look at this, Patanjali speaks of 3 levels of ahamkara, which is 3 levels of the feeling of I am, 3 points of identification. Now, at the dawn of any great evolutionary period, universal consciousness, the universal point of identification, where we're all one, which is our true Buddha nature, emanates in numerous amount of individualities as a reflection of itself. That individuality is who we truly are. That is the individuality that comes with us from birth until death and from life to life. It is what gives us a sense of I am I. And then for each new earth life, for each new incarnation, the individuality emanates an aspect of itself which we call the personality, which becomes the instrument for perceiving things in this material world, and which is absolutely necessary.
Mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions.
So we can ask ourselves, how do we clean up our mirror? And what is actually the dust? Oops, here comes another picture. How did that came into the presentation? So honestly, a question to you all guys who are listening and viewing is, what is the first thought that comes into your mind when you see this cinnamon bun? Does it evoke a kind of memory of something that you have tasted in the past, maybe in your grandmother's kitchen? Or maybe you think that, oh, maybe I need to nibble on something. Maybe I can sneak out right now and take a cup of coffee and a cake. And, with this to illustrate, it's just to illustrate how ruled we are by our senses. Our senses are constantly dancing, in and out with each other. And we are so, you say, steered up by our senses. And our senses is the collection of all the consciousness of all the cells in the body. And this is often what we identify with. And we could say that our current point of identification from that perspective is that we identify with the dust in the mirror. Now, the modifications of the mind is what the dust is called in Patanjali's yoga aphorism. And what are those modifications? Well, memories plays a great part in it. When we meet a situation, we never really see the situation as it really is. As an example, 3 people can be exposed to exact same event, but they can perceive it very differently because their mind has been conditioned through memory from previous experiences and courses to see things like through a veil. And like some previous students said, if you dip your glasses in marmalade, marmalade will be all you see. There is also in the modifications of the mind our likes and dislikes. In the personal daily life, we pretty much move from dislikes the whole time and try to find likes. So we move from these polarities all the time, and we try to avoid the dislikes, and we try to capture the likes, so to speak. But what we maybe forget is that these patterns are energies. They are elemental fields. They are energies that makes ripples in our mind. I think that Alex would have called them the karmic winds that disturb the mind and that is caused by memory, likes and dislikes. And this actually have an impact all the way into our brain. The latest research in medical science is that, for example, if you have a pain in any part of the body, and that pain continues for more than 3 to 6 months, which is considered then to be a chronic case, it has actually created a pain loop in the brain. So the new synapses have formed and there is a new electrical current that is engraving a pattern in the brain. And so whenever we think about the pain, whenever we think that we want to get rid of it, we actually accentuate this loop in the brain. And it's actually also said that the pain may not even exist in the body any longer, but it exists in that perpetuated memory in the brain. And we have also discovered then that by focusing on something totally different than the pain, we will actually create a new loop in the brain that will counteract the pain loop. And all this, the patterns of the personality, is what create that illusion that we heard from the quote in the voice to begin with. It creates the idea of separateness. And of course, each one of us is unique. Each one has our specific thing that we can participate with in this existence. But no one is more unique than anyone else.
Concentration, or yoga, is the hindering of the modifications of the thinking principle.
So here we are. How do we then stop all these things? Einstein was very wise. He said that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Now, some of our most ingrained habits, we are so identified with that we don't even perceive them. So in order to be able to change any personal pattern, we have to create that healthy distance, like a meta perspective, where we can watch ourselves, where we can regard ourselves from a bit of a distance in order to be able to change it. So guiding the mind in a spiritual direction demands a shift in our point of identification.
If we would ever know and understand our natures, we must first understand that there is in us that which never changes at all. Whatever changes are brought about by it, we never are the things we see or feel or hear or know or experience.
So how are we going to find out that sometimes have become the witness position? So we have to establish the meta perspective. So you know the term fake it until you make it? Well, we have to try and picture ourselves as that individuality, the permanent aspect in us, that which leads us towards integration away from separateness. And from that perspective, we have to act almost like a parent towards a child, an unruly child. So how can we guide that child that our personality is in the right direction with a lot of humor, with a lot of compassion, and with a lot of discipline at times? And you know how it is with kids. They never listen to what you say, but they imitate what you do. So if we want to encourage the personality to become more compassionate, we also have to cultivate a compassionate attitude towards it, so we can guide it in a good direction, for example. So the witness position is a word also, just like meditation, that is being used a lot these days. And the witness position has so many different dimensions. It's not one static thing. You could call it the process of gradual awakenings. So I have Ava here, and Ava is looking at her flaws in her character. That's one thing. But then we have that which is watching Ava, watching her flaws. So you can always see that the witness position is a receding process that at the very, very sort of final, within quotes, position, it is that pure Buddha nature of awareness. So what do we do when those quirky things come up in our personality, things and habits that we are not so fond of? Well, we know that what we try to neglect, it will never work. Neglecting something just takes a lot of energy and it doesn't go away. It will be like an ostrich putting their head in the sand. We also know from an occult perspective that if we act it out, it will reinforce the actual force, just like with a pain synapses, loop in the brain. So suppressing it doesn't work either. It's like, keeping that ball beneath the water, and then as soon as you let go, it splashes up in your face. And of course, we cannot identify with it either, because then we don't have that healthy distance. So one perspective to do it is first to observe it from the witness position. So when I come into the supermarket and I find myself becoming impatient with the people in front of me because someone cannot find a credit card, then I can step back, watch my mind, and see what qualities am I letting into my mind right now, and how can I cultivate its opposite. Now, there's a very useful mantra to challenge the personal point of identification. And some of you who have heard me talk before may have heard it before, and you may also have tried it out. But for those of you who haven't, I would challenge you to try it out. So it comes from a story from a Swedish author called Björn Natthiko Lindeberg. And he is a famous guy here in Sweden. He was a very, very well-known investor. At the age of 24, he had all the luxuries that he could have. Each day in the morning, he would stand in front of the mirror, he would adjust his tie, he would put the thumbs up and he said, "You can make it, Björn." And then he would go out and he would try to sell in all sorts of projects. And every morning he would repeat the same ritual until one morning when he stood there, had adjusted his tie, put up his thumb, and he said, "No, I can't do it any longer. I cannot make people invest in things that are actually harmful to the planet," for example. So he had this deep voice within himself that said, "You have to search elsewhere. This is not what life is about." Within a week, he had given up his position, sold his possession, and started his quest for truth. And that took him to a monastery in Thailand, where he became a forest Buddhist monk for 18 years. And in that monastery, every now and then they would have a teacher coming from some other part of the world to give a lecture. And all the monks were very much appreciating this because something broke the monotony of the monk's life, I guess. And so one evening, a very famous teacher came to the monastery and he sat down and he said, "Tonight, I'm going to impart to you the most important mantra that exists, to keep a check on the lower mind, to keep a check on the personal ego." And the monks were kind of looking amongst themselves because this was not a tradition that we're used to having mantras. So they thought, well, is he off the bend or what is happening? And he said, "Listen, the excellent mantra," the teacher continued, "and you only have to repeat it 3 times. You can do it your own language, but you have to be perfectly focused when you do it." And so now he got the monk's attention. And so he said, "Are you ready?" And then he said, "I may be wrong." The monks stared at each other and said, "What?" And then he continued, "I may be wrong. I may be wrong. And believe me, if you haven't tried it before, please do try it. There is nothing that the personal ego dislikes as much as being wrong, especially when it comes to those we are close to." The second point to know about existence is the structure. How does it all work? Am I an active agent in my own life, or am I a victim of circumstances? And this is crucial for the process of meditation. The process of meditation is not a passive one. And the moment we think that we are a victim of circumstances, whether they are on this plane or on the astral plane or any other given plane, then we give a lot of our power of our own life to something on the exterior. Now, if we move into the law of periodicity, which actually rules in everything in nature, we see the cycles in nature, we see the cycle of cause and effect, or the law of karma. We see that of reincarnation, which is an aspect of karma. And we also have intrapersonal cycles. Now, if the process of meditation is a re-education of the mind, we need to know our thought patterns. They come in a cycle. We don't think the same way on a Tuesday as we do on a Friday, for example. We have emotional patterns that comes and go, and we have biophysical cycles. We do know that each organ in our body has its own cycle, and that's why you get jet lag when you travel from one time zone to the other, because the heart and the head arise in real time, whereas the liver, the spleen, the kidneys, and so forth takes time before they find their rhythm again. So when all the organs have refound their rhythm, that's when we say we have come over jet lag. Now, 3 main cycles that are important is the meditation cycle, the 24-hour daily cycle, and the reincarnation cycle. Now, the meditation cycle is a practice for the 24-hour daily cycle. And the 24-hour daily cycle, in its turn, a practice for the reincarnation cycle. So let's look at it together. So here in the waking state, at the bottom, we sit down for meditation and we need to concentrate. In all, ancient traditions of meditation, focusing the mind, quieting the monkey mind, stilling the modifications of mind is the very first step in meditation. So say, for example, that you can meditate on many things, a mantra, a color, a sound, a geometrical symbol, or a concept. So say, for example, that you desire to focus on compassion. Now, if you can keep your focus on compassion and not let any other thoughts interrupt, then you move into the next stage, which is that of contemplation. And in the state of contemplation, you go through all the different concepts that has ever been, associated to the word compassion, all the ideas. And if you persist in that as well, you will go into the third state, which is that then of meditation or just witnessing. And you can say in this state, you no longer are caught in the concepts of compassion, but you are actually becoming compassion itself. We also see that there is a Turiya state. And Turiya is a Sanskrit word that actually just means the fourth state. And this the fourth state that is an aspect of the Buddha nature, pure awareness. Now, the reason we need to learn how to meditate in this way, and it is described in detail in Patanjali's Yoga Aphorism. This here is actually a very simplified version of the Sanyama process that comes described in book number 3. The reason why we need to establish a witness position that will take us all the way in from the focus point of concentration through contemplation into meditation is because we want to be able to do the same thing in a 24-hour cycle. So in the 24-hour cycle, in our waking state, our feelings, our thoughts, our action creates energy. This energy is going to be reflected in the dreaming state as images, as dreams, and so forth. And then we go, in ordinary cases, from the waking to the dreaming and then to the dreamless sleep, where we come the closest to our innermost being, where all the inspiration, all the wisdom, all the compassion is centered in our heart. And then the question is, how do I bring that back through the dreaming state back to the waking? Well, the waking state is where we practice. We need to establish in the waking state an awareness of the witness in us, so that when the body falls asleep, we can actually transition into the next state of consciousness, which is the dreaming state. We create a channel, the channels of the witness position, that we continue into the dreamless sleep. And from there, we move back again through the dreaming state, back into the waking state. And this time, if we can do it consciously, we will bring with us all the wisdom from the higher levels of states of consciousness. But I don't know if you have tried it, but it's very, very hard to stay awake while falling asleep. This in its turn is also a preparation for this. So you can see the similarities, that correspondence here in these 3 cycles. So not until we are able to move through waking state, dream state, dreamless state, and back consciously, we will be able to do the same thing. Because here's a similarity. In incarnating life, we are again accumulating energy. We are creating energy through selfish desires, and we may also have spiritual longings that we haven't been able to fulfill in this life. So when we leave the body, we go into this state of Kamaloka, which is where the selfish desires are expanding themselves and end up at karmic seeds for a future incarnation. And then we go into Devachan, where all the spiritual longings can flourish. And when those energies has expanded themselves, we have that moment of clarity where we see all the different causes that has led us up to the point where we're about to enter into new incarnation, and we accept it. Now, for a Mahatma, who has mastered going from waking through dreaming to dreamless sleep, and also have mastered to go from incarnated life through these different levels, will eventually not need to go through the levels because they will already be lived here and now, so to speak. So meditation is about the preparation for moving through the different states of consciousness, whether it's the 24-hour cycle or whether it's for going from one life to the next with an intact point of identification. And we have wonderful examples of this living today. Someone like the Dalai Lama or other persons within the Tibetan Buddhism tradition that are called tulkus, those that can reincarnate consciously. And then we come to the third point of existence. What is the purpose of life? Well, the purpose is evolution. We need to realizing our potentials, our Buddha nature, through self-induced efforts, so no longer a victim of circumstances. And we have to move towards reintegration and wholeness. And as we also heard in the Kuan Yin pledge, we are not in this for ourselves. We are one in the universal consciousness. So we are doing this to be of better service and help to all sentient beings. So the process is to move from object to subject. First, when we come in touch with ideas like theosophical ideas, we have a tendency to objectify them. And we need a head doctrine. If I'm going into a foreign country or territory, I need to know if there are any dangers that I have to watch out for, any challenges. It's like mapping out the path and the process of meditation. But the heart doctrine is actually walking the path. And sometimes it has been said about us Theosophists that we are like people that go to very exclusive restaurants and we spend most of the time just reading the menus, and we read them over and over again, but we never actually get to eat. So the heart doctrine means to walk the path and not just to talk about it. This path is called antaskarana within the theosophical literature, a Sanskrit word that means, among many other things, the bridge or the channel between the higher and lower aspect of our consciousness. You know that famous passage in The Voice where it says, you cannot travel on the path before you have become that path yourself. So what is this mysterious path that, whether it leads to the east or to the west, is always where you are? Well, one way of looking upon it is that the path is a state of consciousness. And in all those moments when we are managing to realize a spiritual fulfillment in our daily life, being able to do something that is totally selfless, those golden moments, we are on the path. But we can also see that most of the time we are like those shadows outside of the path that is also described in the third fragment of The Voice. Now, the pledge is a process. So if we come back to the Kuan Yin pledge, there is an occult phenomena that takes place when we take a pledge like that.
Changes may occur in the instrument during one life so as to make it appropriate for a new class of karma. This may take place through intensity of thought and the power of a vow.
So let's look at what is actually happening when we take a pledge. Well, we begin to establish an inner dialogue by activating the polarities of our different points of identification. Taking the pledge is confirming the universal point of identification within ourselves. And it is also activating the individual point of identification. And so when we take the pledge, we feel inspired, and that inspiration comes from our higher self. So with that inspiration, in order for it to become a communication, a dialogue, a path, it needs that personality keeps persisting and aspiring towards a higher state of consciousness. Then there is that flow of polarity. It's like a magnetism that's being set up. And of course, it can only work also if you apply it. So inspiration, aspiration, and application is an occult process that kicks in when we take a pledge and we try to stay true to it. This is a famous statement, isn't it? Ethics or applied metaphysics. So we've been talking about a little bit about the metaphysical aspect of meditation. But in order to transform our mind and the different vestures of the mind, we actually need ethics. There's no way around it. Ethics is the foremost of all. We also have it as the very basis for the Theosophy to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood. So the path or the process of meditation consists of 7 transcendental virtues, the paramitas as we find them in the voice. These are 7 golden keys to the 7 portals. The golden keys are us. We are the key to those portals. At the moment, I would think that most of our keys are a bit rusty. So how can we, transform our rusty keys into golden keys so they can open those gates? Now, each paramita is 7-fold. It means that in each paramita, the other 6 are also represented. If we add that up, it becomes the 49 fires. The 49 fires of our whole constitution that we have to activate in the direction of compassion to be able to fully realize our Buddha nature. Now, we tend to forget sometimes that the paramitas are actually occult forces, because the key that is going to unlock the door or the portal that will then bring in those forces or shaktis into activity, they are actually the very essence of the Dhyani Buddhic consciousness. So these are actually the forces that emanates in 7 different rays from the one universal consciousness. And once they emanate, they become twofold. They can be used for good purpose, unselfish purpose, or they can be used for selfish purpose. So there always has to be this balance between the polarity, the horizontal polarity of the opposing forces. We also see it described in documents over the lokas and talas. There have to be a loka, positive aspect, and there have to be a tala, a negative aspect. And you know how it is said that if a Mahatma uses a power to create a psychic phenomena, the same amount of energy will be at the disposal for the darker forces of nature. So what happens when we take the pledge and we try and practice these virtues? Well, what happens is that we set in motion the exact same process. So let's take a look how we activate the horizontal axis. So take Dana, the keynote for the 7 paramitas, that of love and charity immortal. And just look at it. This is a polarity. So the more we strive towards practicing charity and love immortal, the more we'll also activate the other polarity, which is everything that counteracts charity and love immortal. And it is kind of discouraging because here I am, a spiritual searcher, a seeker. I try to be more charitable. I've taken the pledge. I want to be more compassionate. And all of a sudden, all these things are creeping up to the surface, like in a melting pot. All the dirty metals or, metals comes up to the surface. And so it can be discouraging, but then we have to remember this is part of the process. And as much as I push in one direction, the more we will drudge up to the surface. Couldn't be in another way because it has to come up to the surface. Anything that is counterpart to the love immortal will come up to the surface because it needs to be dealt with. Now, if we look at Sheila, harmony in thought, word, and act, well, look at someone like the Dalai Lama. When he speaks, even if it's 800 persons sitting there listening to him, each one feels that he speaks straight to their heart. Now, this is the power of Sheila, the power to cross through thought, word, and act, and reach out. And when a person like that does it, others listen. Now, I don't know how it is for you guys, but very many times I find myself thinking one thing, saying another, and acting in a third way. So even if I do have my golden moment, like we all do, and when we do, we see how there is a flow, how we make an impact if we do it with a compassionate attitude. Shanti is the virtue of patience. The force of patience is one of the stronger forces, because patience is not only about being impatient and a counterdote to that, because impatience is not to be able to stay in the present moment. So patience means to be able to be focused here and now and not let the mind stray hither or thither, to be able to listen in the conversations I have with other people, to be able to be present in everyday situation with that compassionate attitude that the keynote of Dana transmitted to us. Vairagya is an interesting virtue. It's in the middle. You have 3, and then you have Vairagya, and then you have another 3. It stands for equanimity and discernment. It says that indifference to pleasure and pain, truth alone perceived, which makes no room for further karmic action, right? So how can we live our life in a way that whatever situation I meet, I can realize and recognize this is exactly what I need for continuing my process in spiritual development. Now, if we take an enlightened being who has to live in perfect equanimity like that, they have cleaned their mirror out of the dust. The mirror is reflecting the pure light of Buddhi or perfect discernment, and so can see clearly in all situations and can also be able to interact with any being on any given level or plane. So for us, we also have those moments in miniature, moments where we actually are in balance. And when we're in balance, well, then we're more apt to listen to our intuitive faculty. And it's interesting because once we are in balance like that, we will find that the spiritual will, even if just for a moment, becomes free from personal desires. It soars upwards. And it is this, you could say, that brings an enlightened being into states of samadhi or meditation. But for us, maybe it gives rise to enthusiasm, to devotion, to want to try to do more to progress on the path. And for the enlightened being, it means perfect concentration or awareness. And we can all recognize that we also have those small golden moments in our life when we have a perfect concentration, when there is this element of awareness. And remember, it's one taste, and however small you have tasted that one taste, you will not forget it. And then that will in itself give rise to being able to reflect prajna, the wisdom of compassion, or our true Buddha nature. Now, if we look at this from a Nirmanakāyic point of view, and the Nirmanakāya is someone who has found salvation, who has given it up for not going into nirvana, but staying on to help all sentient beings to be liberated from the bondage of illusion. Here you can see that such a being has, been successful in letting its personal consciousness, here symbolized by the square, merge into the individual consciousness, symbolized by the triangle, and then merged into the very essence of being. So here we have the perfect tetractys of Pythagoras. And here there is no different in the point of identification. Such a being can move through the different states of consciousness that we call waking, dreaming, dreamless sleep, and turiya, or all these seven different states of consciousness that are represented on page 200 of Secret Doctrine. And they not only can move through these states of consciousness without losing the point of identification, but they can also interact with all the different beings on all those different levels, which they have dedicated their mission to help to relieve from misery and suffering. And so what we can do in our daily life to at least attempt to stay in the process of a lifetime meditation is what we find in the voice of the silence to end the talk.
Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed.
So I hand it over to you, Joe, I guess, for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Eva, for a very lucid and versatile or creative way of looking at these the paramitas and other aspects of theosophical doctrine that you looked at. I would like to start off with a question, going to the healing, the subject of healing. Frequently we become fixed on our, we will identify where we think we're unhealed in body or mind, and sort of kind of dictate the terms of where we think we need to see results of healing. What you've described as a kind of a very deep healing. I wonder if you could say something about that, about our expectations of how our own healing should come about, and why those expectations might get in the way of what we really need.
Well, I think it's very true what you say, Joe, what you mentioned here, that all our expectations also become at times obstacle on the path, Say that you have a very good meditation session and immediately you want more of that. So the next time you sit down for meditation, what happens? You are so focused on personal desires, what you want and what you don't want, that very desire stands as an obstacle. So the same thing, with self-healing, you have to somehow at times step out of the way. You have to do everything you can to maintain health and to stay healthy. But if the only focus become your personal health, then it acts as a stumble block because you're so focused, or one is so focused on the personal ego perspective. So what Mr. Judge is saying, for example, in one of his articles, is that if you're really feeling like kind of depressed, or if you're gloomy, or if you have a lot of pain or suffering, try and do something of a goodness, something good for someone else, to lift off the focus on yourself, because it's actually that self-focus with regards to the personality that becomes the obstacle for the body also healing itself. I don't know, probably there are many students here that has a lot more knowledge than I do, so please let the question go out also to everyone.
Someone in the, Jerry, I think Jerry, yeah, let's see. Eva, have you unshared your screen? Let's see, I think
I think we're okay now.
Oh, we're okay. Okay, I slid mine over so I couldn't tell anymore. Okay, great. Thank you. You have the function of raising your hand, I believe, although I don't see it now on mine, but there's Kirk has his hand up. Please, Kirk.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, Eva, for very engaging and beautiful talk, wonderful flow of ideas, and very helpful and insightful. One of the points that you mentioned was in reference to the Tibetan tradition in which you have teachers and students, you could say, of that tradition, who advanced students who can and who do consciously prepare for their next incarnation and consciously maintain a continuity from one life to the next within that tradition, right? So that they, like the classic example is that of the Dalai Lama, and he, in his book, My Land, My People, he describes how in the process of dying, the 13th Dalai Lama indicated where the next incarnation would be. And that gave monks clues as to where to look and so on. And then there was a whole process of discovery that went on. And this is a very long-standing tradition. And so my question is, what would you say is, for persons who are, not, say, established in a long-standing tradition like that, and who yet want to try and develop some continuity between the efforts they have established in this life, presuming they are a benefit and are cultivating some of the themes you talked about. What do you think are the keys to kind of maintaining the continuity of stream and of effort into one's next life?
Well, there are very many ways. I think foremost of all, it's our attitude to why we're trying to do what we try to do. So the pledge is crucial. And if you ask me if there would be something that I would like to keep from one incarnation to the next, it would be my intent to continue to try and realize the pledge. I may lose all the knowledge that I have acquired intellectually, as long as I don't use the intent to go on with my quest towards realizing that pledge. And in doing so, I think we fortify an aspect in ourselves that goes beyond the personality. Because in order for us to be able to remember previous lives, we have to be able to establish a point of identification where we realize that we really are this eternal pilgrim. And to the extent that we little by little can realize this, then we will become less and less dependent on the personality, and we will carry over the memory that is called reminiscence, the memory of the soul. But memory of the soul cannot be activated until we have started to identify with that soul that comes back over and over again. So that's one way of viewing it. But let's again put the question out to the audience and see if we have any other thoughts on it.
Ava, I'm going to keep the questions moving here, and anybody, of course, you can address that. Thank you. That phrase, fortify this impersonal or immortal part of ourselves in daily life. That's a wonderful phrase to stay with. Alan, I think you're next.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. When I read HPP and the Secret Doctrine, I get a sense of antagonism between her sense of what science was at that time. The most recent thing that's impressed me is the descriptions that I'm hearing from modern scientists regarding the evolution of matter from the Big Bang on. And, in stars, it evolves further, and the stars today are different from our star, which was created 4 billion years ago. New matter is being created. So stars that are being created today are in a more refined or a different kind of matter. And when I hear what they say, it seems like what HPP was saying about the evolution of the soul, it's almost the same vocabulary. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing if two questions. One is teaming up with modern science and bringing that into our theosophical conversation. Is that a possible strategy? And have you seen things in modern scientific literature and thought that you think is particularly pertinent to the theosophical evolution?
Well, just a short answer. I think that if HPB would have written The Secret Doctrine today, she would have used all these references that you refer to, you know. Most of the references from The Secret Doctrine, from that science of that time, can today, you know, could probably have been updated a lot today. So we always have to broaden our minds, so we are updated also with science, not to adopt the theosophical ideas to fit into science, but see how they correlate. So that's one thing. Now, within my field, I work with a connection between the mind and the body. And so all the science today in neuroplasticity, how we actually today have proof of what HPB has claimed and the occult tradition has claimed, that the very way of our thinking is creating molecular structures in the brain to change, that we fire up new synapses, new patterns in the brain, and that it's never too late to change the patterns of the brain. No matter what age we are, the brain is continually changing itself. So in my field, I work within psychosomatic medicine then, so there is a lot of new research that is confirming this, you know, how meditation can affect the mind, that can affect the body as well. And you know how she says, I don't know if it's in ISIS or in DSD, how she says that the breakthrough for the astral body will probably come within the field of medicine. And, you know, hopefully we are approaching it. But of course, when we, as you started off with looking out into the cosmos and seeing all these elaborated ideas, well, we tend to look outward. But if we remember what Alex talked about last Saturday, the same telescope we can turn inwardly, because what is out there in the macrocosmos, we have as a representation within ourselves. So it's more an interest of how do we get acquainted with our own mind and the interplanetary system, so to speak.
Thank you. Monica, you're next.
Thank you very much. First of all, this was just a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Is clarifying a lot of ideas for me, but I'd like to ask about the idea of bringing into the next incarnation what we'd like. And what I want to know is, first of all, if I understand correctly, we're all a compilation of various incarnations that we've had. And I have been of the mind that the soul chooses what it's going to work out for the next incarnation. And so what I'm wanting to know is this idea the same idea that His Holiness speaks of in bringing into the next incarnation the same aspirations and state of evolution for the purpose of helping mankind? Are we doing that on some small level? And if so, are we enabling ourselves to have, say, a bigger chunk, as it were, of the pie for the next incarnation? And is that only for the sake of service? I hope that's making sense.
Well, I actually think that you answered your own question very well, because I would say yes to all of that. You know, what is it that our heart is focused on? If our heart is truly focused on how can I be best of service, then it becomes less important wherever I will return, you know, whatever part of the globe, in whatever circumstances, as long as I don't lose that intent, that motivation of the pledge, I will be in exactly the right position to continue what I need to be done. You know, those golden moments in our life where we're just in the right place at the right time, doing the thing that needs to be done and realizing it. So, most of the time we look for our duty a bit further away than where we actually are. So I think all the points that you pointed out, I think are helpful to maintain. And when you say a larger slice of the pie, I understand that as reinforcing the motivation to keep going in the same direction, right? So I would say yes. I don't know if that answered your question, Monica, but otherwise you have to come back.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Ava, this morning I came across a quotation from the New York Times a year ago. It was by a writer who travels with the Dalai Lama in Japan at times. And he said that he heard the Dalai Lama say very often, after watching the planet up close as a leader of his people for what was then 79 years, he felt that the world was suffering through an emotional crisis. The cure, said the Dalai Lama, was emotional disarmament. I wonder if that has any meaning to you in view of what you've told us today.
Just to clarify the word disarmament, is that to put down your, what is a disarmament?
Yes, it would be, right. It was, exactly, it's a military term. It means to, exactly, to surrender your weapons and to,
yeah.
No, exactly.
Yes. So I think it's true that the whole world is in an emotional state of imbalance, right? So I think that, it's more, it's nothing wrong with emotions. We just have to give it another direction. It's that process of transformation, and we can all see it in ourselves, right? I become impatient, I become jealous, I become angry, I become fearful. And when I see those things arises in my mind, how can I disarm them? How can I not give them power? How can I cultivate their opposites? So it's that type of polarity that we also had, as I tried to express with the paramitas, right? So that is kind of you disarming the one polarity, taking care of it and transforming it into the other polarity. Because we tend to forget why are we here? We are highly evolved spiritual beings. We are taking upon ourselves a bodhisattvic path that we haven't yet become aware of. We're starting to wake up to the fact. So we are here to try and elevate all different things that we come in contact with to a state of higher awareness. So try to transform those field of elementals that carry our emotions or our thought patterns, to transform them into something that become of use for not ourselves, but for humanity and all sentient beings. If I didn't understand the question correctly, Joe, you will need to rephrase it, or I will need help from someone else to explain it. Sorry.
No, that's very helpful, actually. The writer said what the Dalai Lama meant by the striking phrase was that we can see beyond panic and rage and confusion only by using our minds, and that part of the mind that doesn't deal in binaries. And he says emotional disarmament may be more feasible in terms of the bulkiness of government, may be more feasible than actual physical disarmament at this point.
And he also said, didn't he, Joe, that it's all a question about establishing a dialogue. Just like we're establishing a dialogue within ourselves to make a connection with our higher aspects, we also have to establish a dialogue between different beings, right? Because I think, at least the way I understand Theosophy, is all about making those connections. Connections inwardly, but also the connections outwardly.
Thank you very much. Maria, you were next.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Eva, for a lovely, very well put together presentation. In responding to the question about continuity from one life to another, it seems to me that a universal religious practice, meditation or prayer, is points of silence during the day when the vow can be repeated. Times of silence when the identification with the soul is remembered and sustained and strengthened, so that during the day, for example, morning, noon, and nighttime, one maintains this continuity, and then entering sleep at night, it is remembered again, so that when one wakes in the morning or even during the nighttime, as many of us do, that vow is always the first thing that comes to mind. And whatever is encountered during the night or day has that soul presence to meet it. And it seems to me that we have always known right from the beginning, from ancient times on this planet, how to maintain that continuity. HPB mentions that our first, our thought on incarnating physically, our last thought was that memory of those who helped assisted us into incarnation. If that can be brought into our daily life now, if it can be remembered, then the next time around, the next time here, we will understand a little more, and we'll recognize each other and also the beings who share the planet with us at that time. There will be no loss of continuity.
Thank you, Maria. I think that's so beautifully expressed. So thank you for sharing that. And it's so true what you're saying. If you think about the personal life for soul, it's so full of everyday duties that it's so easy to lose oneself in those. And to take those moments of the day and before going to bed at night, you know, to just try and center and remember, as you point out so beautifully, who we truly are. That is to me that golden current of the lifetime meditation. So you try and act from that center in whatever you do during the day, and try as much as you can whenever, which we will do the whole time, stray away with the mind in different directions and bring it back to that heart connection, which is the reminding of who we truly are. So thank you, very important point.
Let's see. Kirk, do you have your hand up again, or did you just not put your hand down?
I put it down and I put it up again.
Very good.
So thank you for the response to the first question, and to Maria as well. That was very, as you said, very beautifully stated and inspiring. And along with that, this is, again, I think, practically bent question. You mentioned Simon Magus as pointing to the importance of the image as a goal, as an ideal towards which the soul is oriented. And it seemed that you were also indicating this as a crucial aspect in the process of meditation, like almost like a starting point. Obviously one doesn't want to, we're not thinking of an anthropomorphic image, right? We're thinking, or maybe we are, maybe that's appropriate for some people. But I was just wondering, in your mind, what do you see, what is the image that you hold, let's say, of that being who has fully realized the witness position, as you put it, who has fully realized the Buddha nature? Do you start with an image of the Buddha, or is that up to each person, would you say, or is it geometric? Is it, does it involve colors, you know, and so on? I'm just wondering if you could give some practical suggestions about that.
Well, I do think that all of those suggestions may work for different people. You know, for some person, it will be an image that you hold of some enlightened being that you, that's to you symbolizes the potential that you yourself are trying to develop and to help everyone else along on the road. So the image also can be our theosophical teachings, because our theosophical teachings are archetypal ideas. When we peel off all the exterior, we see the universal ideas, archetypal ideas. So to ponder up an archetypal idea will set up in the mind an archetypal pattern, which is where we want the mind to move into an archetypal pattern instead of being fractionized into many different, opinions of the senses and so forth. So I think you can use that very much in theosophical literature. We are advised to use the Aum, for example. We have Mr. Judge, who has written a beautiful article on the Aum sound that you can internalize as a mantra, and that can help you to strike a keynote for going inward. So there are many different ways of doing it, but I do think that also what Maria pointed out, if we think how it's said that the last thought before we pass away is of crucial importance, how it will influence the next life. So correspondentially, what we focus on as the last thought before we go to sleep, whatever that ideal may be for each individual, but it is to help to maintain that archetypal pattern in the mind to create that. So I think that there are many ways to do it. I don't know if that answered your question, Kirk, otherwise you have to come up with a follow-on.
No, I think you answered it well. Thank you.
Eva, in your presentations, you spoke about the pain loop, which I thought was interesting, and that in fact our minds can recur to pain even when the pain is no longer there. I thought of the pain of trauma, that one's mind kind of can easily gravitate or fall into a recurrent fascination with the horror or the fearful of the lack of control that one felt during a traumatic incident. I wonder if you could say anything about that. You talked about observing and applying an antidote. Anyway.
And of course, that's different for each individual. Working as a therapist, I have met many people that have been exposed to trauma of different kinds. And for some people, it has been absolutely crucial to work through and to be able to talk about it, to turn it and twist it around and so forth in order for it to fall more into place, right? But it becomes unhealthy if we then start to cling to that and we cannot move away from it. So there is one aspect of self-healing that it has to be acknowledged what has happened. It has to be confirmed often by someone on the exterior. And then one has to try and cultivate the opposite. And that could be, for some people, it's actually helping others in the same situation, which one may question whether that is actually to move away from it or not, but could it be a way to deal with it? And for others, to find new avenues and to help a person see that it's not healthy to keep on reactivating the whole drama over and over again. So if one can explain to a client or a patient what mechanisms are actually taking place in the brain, then most people see the common sense in trying to move away from it somehow and to try and focus instead of what is possible, because otherwise that trauma will, act as a stumbling block for the rest of the life and just become bigger and bigger, so to speak.
Now, as a therapist, would you say that's part of the limitation of sort of the old Freudian psychotherapeutic model, and that there's more constructive therapeutic models now that, I don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy, or I hear about, I don't know anything about.
Well, there are many, I would say, thank God that we don't practice the Freudian, type of therapy that much any longer. that we have moved more into, that's the beauty with many of the Buddhistic philosophies. They have a really great perspective on what therapy can be from a soul perspective. So yeah, that's the forum for a total series of seminars.
Let's see, Jerry, please.
Yeah, actually, my question was right along the same lines. In fact, in many ways, you've already answered it, because I was thinking about the idea that all of us in this meeting, by and large, have a philosophy to turn to and learn from. But so much of humanity, it seems to me, is suffering from a dramatic amount of, you might say, emotional suffering. And you hear the word pressure and stress constantly being mentioned in conversations with friends and families and coworkers. So there's this sense that of an overriding anxiety that humanity maybe is perpetually in a state of, perhaps. So my question, which you've been answering, was, this witness position, this idea of critical distance, detachment, however you might define it, is kind of, it seems to be like a starting point to help an individual start to get a grasp on whatever challenges they're facing. And as a therapist, when people come to you, they kind of realize they have a problem and they need help. But my question, I guess, to boil it down even further, is for our friends and family who don't have the benefit of the theosophical philosophy to lean on, what are little things that we can do to help the people around us deal with these struggles and anxieties, to move a few inches away from the problem and get a slight amount of little critical distance?
Well, I think pretty much the same way that we will do with our children, Jerry. When we have a child that is scared or so, we try to encourage the capacities that they are able to perform, right? So, if you have a small boy who is very bad in maths, but he's brilliant in playing the classical guitar, for example. So, let him play the classical guitar. Let him feel the self-confidence of being able to follow that path of his. And so in any way that we can strengthen the positive qualities by encouragement, by not focusing or helping to focus on the problems, I think it's helpful. Something that I've written about in my book is that, pain is unavoidable. All of us are going to suffer physical, emotional, psychological pain. Suffering is optional. So stress is unavoidable, but stressing is optional. So at all time, how can we help a person to get that distance? You can feel the pain, you shouldn't avoid the pain, but you don't have to cling to it, so it becomes suffering more than necessary. The same thing, you can, all of us have stress, and it's a absolutely necessary mechanism in our organism to have stress, but the stressing is optional. So we can develop strategies for how to deal with stress so we don't get identified with it. Because if we get identified with stress, anxiety, whatever it is takes over. It takes totally over. So we have to work with in those moments when we feel less stressed or less anxious in order to create a platform from where to work. And there are of course therapeutic instruments for doing so, right?
I realize we're right here at the hour. I wonder if we could just take a minute to give, Anna has her hand up. And Anna, I wonder if you might have a short comment you'd like to share?
Not really, because Eva actually took the words from my mouth. But I think it's important to encourage positive aspects of a challenge or positive aspects of the things you're able to do, and also associating those kind of aspects with things that make your unconscious mind change its patterns. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you again, Eva, for what you've shared with us today. Very helpful key ideas, the slides you made, and just your therapeutic presence. It was a wonderful way to close this series on meditation and self-study. Special thanks again to Alex for his presentation last week, and Jerry starting us off. Really a beautiful, lucid, informative presentations all around. And Jerry, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make? All right. And thank you all of you who tuned in and paid attention, and the really interesting questions and comments. It's been a really enjoyable educational experience for me. So blessings, and until next time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Ava. That was
Thank
incredible.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Ava.
Thank you.
I learned so much from your presentation
Thank
and
you.
the ones that came before.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for doing this. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you.